LGBTQIA2S. Today we are on the letter Q, which stands for queer. Sometimes there are two Qs, one for queer and one for questioning. Since I don't really have any book recommendations that are specifically for people who are questioning, I am just going to stick with generally queer books today. And what I mean when I say generally queer is that these are books that either have so many queer characters that it's hard to fit them into just like one category, or they are books that have queer representation, but it isn't necessarily the main storyline. They're just like characters in the background, being allowed to live their lives and be queer, which is something that I personally love to see in books. One more housekeeping note before we get into the book recommendations. I know that queer is still sort of a loaded term. There are still people out there that do not like the word queer because it has been used as a slur against them. That is not the way that I am using the word here today. When I say queer, I personally identify as queer. I use it to mean that I have so many non-heteronormative identities that I just generally go with queer as a easier, shorter way to indicate that I am not heteronormative or cisnormative. And so I am using queer as in the queer community, as in having fully reclaimed that word. So, without further ado, let's get into the book recommendations. As usual, I am going to start with my nonfiction recommendations, and the very first one that I have is The Queer Bible. So, The Queer Bible is a collection of essays written by and about queer people. I will say that it does skew very white and very male. However, I still think it's a delightful collection of essays. It is one where I read every single one in order rather than skip around or skip any. My favorite one, honestly, is probably the one by Elton John on the drag queen Divine. But there is also an essay in here about Elton John, which I thought was pretty delightful. There's an essay about what David Bowie means to the queer community, despite the fact that that was never a label that he claimed for himself. You can see on the back we have a list of contributors. There are quite a few essays in here. Essays about Paris is Burning and RuPaul and Tim Curry. Dan France wrote an essay about the first iteration of Queer Eye. It's just like a really delightful combination of cultural commentary and history. There's a lot in here about the ways that queer people have influenced TV, music, and movies. And it just was a good collection of essays. One of the other things that I like too, so it's kind of like divided into sections. And the people who contributed the essays, there's just like really lovely illustrations of them in the book. I liked the way that the chapter splash pages were presented. It is sort of written like kind of like a magazine would, in that it puts the, like, I don't even know what those are called. Like, it interrupts its own text with quotes from its text. And I do find that, like, a little bit distracting, because for me it interrupts the flow of reading it. But if you're more used to reading, like, magazine news article type essays, it probably won't bother you. Makes good scratching sounds too. So the next one that I want to talk about is Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye has written 2 books now. The first is Over the Top. The second is Love That Story. Over the Top is his memoir. And in Love That Story, they're more like exploring different topics. It's like a collection of essays. I thought that they were both really good. I listened to both of them as audiobooks. Jonathan Van Ness does read the audiobooks. So if you are a Queer Eye fan, which I definitely am, then you will probably enjoy listening to the audiobook, because it very much, like, he is the one reading it, so obviously it sounds like him, but his tone and word choice and all of that, he stays very true to in the essays and in the memoir. So it does read as if they are talking to us, which I really liked. If you are someone who finds them a little bit too much or over the top, you may want to avoid the audiobook version. But I still really liked both quite a bit. And my last non-fiction is Mythos by Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry has a whole collection of, like, Greek retellings, Greek and Roman retellings, but this is the one that I have read. So I grew up on the Greek and Roman mythology, and to a slightly lesser extent, Egyptian and Norse and Celtic. My dad is a big old nerd, just like me, and he was really into the mythology, in part because he was really into Dungeons and Dragons. So I grew up with a lot of mythology as bedtime stories type deal, and most of what I was familiar with came from the Edith Hamilton version of Greek and Roman mythology. So, this definitely does draw on a lot of the same sources, but when Edith Hamilton's version came out in the 80s, it was not really acknowledging how very, 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 very gay some of the original source material was not really acceptable. It wouldn't have been published with a lot of that in there. So Mythos came out, I believe, last year, and Stephen Fry puts the gay stories back in. And oh boy, are they gay. There is just a preponderance of queer mythology, not just the story of Hermaphroditus, I think is how you pronounce that, which of course is where we got the original term hermaphrodite, which is not really in medical or not really in much usage anymore. The term has been replaced with intersex, but for Greek and Romans, it was not seen as a bad thing. They had an entire god devoted to it, to people who were a third gender. We also get the story of Ganymede, which is Zeus's cupbearer, book himself, so if you're into audiobooks or if you're a fan of Stephen Fry's tone and delivery, you will enjoy the audiobook. I did a co-read for this one, and it was really delightful. Also, I just really like the cover, the copper and the teal. Anything teal is basically gonna be a winner for me. So moving on to young adults. The Heartbreak Bakery by A.R. Capetta. This was one of my favorite books from last year. It is the story of Sid, who does not use gendered pronouns. Sid identifies as agender. And Sid works in a bakery. And it turns out that Sid can bake Sid's emotions into food. So Sid and W, who is Sid's girlfriend, they break up. And as a result, Sid bakes some brownies. And anyone who eats the brownies ends up also breaking up. So Sid is trying to fix this problem and get all these couples back together. This book is so delightfully queer. It really reminds you of the way that when queer community finds each other, we tend to stick together. So everyone in here is some flavor of queer, the only exception being Sid's parents. But otherwise, it's just a beautiful immersion into queer culture at its absolute best. This is a very sweet story. We have agender, non-binary, and trans representation. Goodness. There are lesbians, there are bisexuals and pansexuals, and it's just gay men, of course. We have couples across all age spectrums, so we're not just focused on a young adult community. Sid is only 17, but the story reads a little bit on the older side than that, which I have no problem with. I actually keep this one with my adult fiction rather than my young adult, but I think it is more technically young adult. So it's just a wonderful story. There is a romance in it. The potential romantic partner identifies as demisexual, so we have some ace rep in here also. There is an arrow character. It's just it just has it all in a way that does not feel forced. It feels very natural and seamless and beautifully done, and it reminds me of all of the most wonderful things about the queer community. So I highly, highly, highly recommend The Heartbreak Bakery. Okay, so this next one is sort of pushing the definition of queer a little bit in that our main characters are not queer. This is a very typically straight romance. However, I am including The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy because we do have a gay male romance happening in the background. So this is essentially a retelling of You've Got Mail, in that the romance in here starts as a series of letters with Heart and Mercy not knowing that they're writing to each other, because outside of these series of letters, they think that they hate each other. So this does have a little bit of an enemies to lovers element. which is not always my favorite trope, but I think that it's well done in here because when they do finally realize what's going on, they explore the root of the misunderstanding at the beginning of their relationship. But the thing that I love about it is that Mercy's brother and Hart's work partner also have a romance going on, and it starts at about the same time, but theirs is just so seamless. No all of the things that are problems for Hart and Mercy could also be problems for her brother and Hart's partner, but instead they're just not. And that background romantic story made me really happy, and I also liked the fact that it's just presented as not an issue. There's no oh my god, my brother is gay, none of that drama. It's just a facet of who her brother is, and it's not treated as any more or less important than the fact that he is a wonderful cook, or that he has a degree in philosophy, or, anything like that. It's just a part of who he is, and that is the kind of representation that I really want to see a lot more of, where queer people are allowed to exist. Their queerness is not a plot device, and they are allowed to be more than just queer. And I think that happens really well in this book, which is why I am recommending it. I'm also recommending it just because I love this book. It's very delightful, and I know that it gets billed a lot as a cozy romance, but also there are zombies, and for me personally, zombies kind of make something not so cozy, but it still feels... It's not a book that's stressful to read. It's definitely not a horror romance, despite the fact that there are zombies. Okay, the next one that I have to recommend is sort of in that same vein of the main characters are not queer, but there are queer characters in the background being allowed to just exist and be queer. And that is the final revival of Opal and Nev. Now, in some ways, I actually think that Opal and Nev could be construed as queer in that they are not conforming with heteronormativity. They are a white man and a black woman in a band together who are not dating, who do not ever show any interest in dating each other, but this takes place in the late 60s or early 70s. I don't quite remember. It's a time during which interracial marriage in the United States is illegal, and this does take place in the United States. So I think that even just bucking those assumptions that a man and a woman cannot be friends, they have to be a couple, but also not conforming to racial stereotyping, or that white and black people should not be interacting, I think could be made an argument for queerness in this book. But also we have, I think his name is Virgil. Virgil Lafleur. So Virgil is Opal's best friend and helps with her wardrobe, and he is gay, but he is also allowed to be more than just a series of queer stereotypes, and I really like that. for him in this story. So the final revival of Opal and Nev is mostly, it's a reporter reporting on Opal and Nev, who are theoretically going to get back together. And the first time that Opal and Nev, not the first time they performed, because they performed as a band long enough to put out a couple of albums, but they had a fairly major show and it all went horribly wrong. There is rampant racism faced by especially Opal because she is a black woman, and some, southern white supremacist motorcycle gang members interrupt the concert and end up murdering someone and are never really brought to justice for it. So there's some heavy themes going on in this book, but I think that it's a really good book. I liked the storytelling style. This is another one that I did as an audiobook because I got the physical copy through the Feminist Book Club. It was one of the Book of the Month picks, and honestly, the font in this book is so small. And I have reading glasses, but I don't like wearing them. So I got the audiobook out from the library instead, and I'm actually really glad that I did because it is the text is like a series of interviews, and it's broken up based on who is speaking. And the audiobook has a different narrator for every major character in the book. And so that was really fun to listen to. Just like a really great way to ingest this story. So yeah, I like that one. Oops. Just knocking over my stack of books here. Okay, so my next, and this one is, rather than a single gay character that I just want to call out as being done well, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler. This book, it's weird. It's a weird book. I really enjoyed it, but it is hard to categorize beyond just being generally queer. So Paul is a shapeshifter, sort of. They can physically change their body between male and female. And so for parts of the book, Paul is a boy, and for parts of the book, Paul is a girl. I can't remember if she's Polly or Paula. I think Polly. Yeah, okay, so people address Paul as Polly when he is looking like a girl, but Paul thinks of himself as Paul throughout the book. So this book, I think it starts in like somewhere on the East Coast. I think he goes into some small like fishing village for a while. That eventually ends up in San Francisco. So it kind of ranges all over the place, but it's kind of just the story of Paul, who doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life. And Paul, as Paul, is a gay man, but Polly is a lesbian. But Paul is not bisexual, which I thought was a really interesting, like, we're in his head and we're just listening to his thoughts, and that is one that he thinks about fairly often. And he's just like bopping around with no real purpose, so it's a very character driven. There is no real plot. And he's just like living in various queer communities. It's a strange book. I don't really know how to describe it beyond that. I really liked it, but I like character driven, and I'm okay with like not really knowing what's going on, and that's sort of what this is. I like the writing style, though. Okay, so let me just check my... Okay, so moving on to fantasy books, which Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl it kind of straddles that line. There's nothing like overtly magical happening other than that Paul is sometimes a girl. And yet it's like not a trans story either. I don't know. It's weird. Maybe I need some of you to read it and tell me what's going on in that book. So moving on to straight up, well, yeah, we're gonna call it straight up fantasy. We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This is a book that I would never have picked up were it not for the Feminist Book Club. The theme for the month that this was chosen was women in sports, and I am not into sports. Just not my thing. But this is about a New England, Massachusetts, field hockey team, and the field hockey team makes a deal with the devil to win their season. So this is a multi-POV story, and some of the points of view are queer, and it just... some of the queerness is not revealed to the end, some of it is pretty obvious throughout. But if you just read the back of the book, you would have no idea that there is any queerness in this story at all. And it is tackling issues of queerness and feminism and competition and power dynamics and race also, because we do have like one Asian gal on an otherwise white team, and how does that affect her? And it's just like a super fun story that I enjoyed so much more than I thought that I was going to, based on just the description of the book. So this is one that's worth picking up, even if you are not into sports and know absolutely nothing about field hockey. Okay. The Monsters We Defy. This is another book that I absolutely loved from last year. It's by Leslie Penelope. First of all, the cover is gorgeous. It is historical fantasy. It is a ghost heist story. Our main character is contracted by a ghost to steal a ring from a living woman. She ends up having to recruit help from other people who have made deals with these ghosts. So it's like a little bit Faustian bargainy, but they're not the devil. They are just like ghosts. Some of the other people involved are a jazz singer with a magical voice, or not a singer, maybe he plays trumpet, jazz musician who can enthrall his audiences. We have a movie star who can change his face, but no one ever remembers him. They only remember his roles. So he is in fact invisible in his true form. He is also queer, and, thanks to him, they end up with access to places that they would not otherwise have ended up, like in a drag ball in 1920s Washington, D.C. It's just a delightful scene. And again, this is a book where his queerness is important to him, but not a major plot point. And again, that is just, I just love the fact that we're getting into an era of books where queer people can just be. They can just exist, and that delights me so much. Okay, couple more, and I'm now racing the battery in my recorder, so wish me luck. No Gods, No Monsters by Cadwell Turnbull. I read this book for the first time a couple months ago, and I flippin' love it to the point where I'm like already looking forward to rereading it. This is a multiverse, multi-POV, and just so thoroughly queer throughout. We have polyamory, we have trans characters, we have lesbians, we have gay men, we have bisexuals or pansexuals. It's just beautifully done, seamlessly done in a way that reflects real queer communities. We have gender non-conforming characters. It's just, and the story is amazing. It's a little bit difficult to follow at points because we have one narrator, and it's not totally clear how reliable he is, but essentially this is the story of people finding out that werewolves. Okay, I did not get lucky. The battery died in the recorder, so where was I? No Gods, No Monsters by Cadwell Turnbull. This is definitely going to be in my top 5 favorite books for the year. I just thought that it was a wonderfully told story, beautifully complex, delightfully queer, dealing with monsters as a metaphor for race, but done in a subtle, this book does not hit you over the head with the message sort of way, which I really like, because I like a book that makes me work a little bit, and this one does. I do recommend the audiobook if you like audiobooks. It's read by Dion Graham, and his voice is so beautiful. I would listen to him read a grocery list. All in all, delightful book. Definitely recommend it. Okay, I don't know why it started clicking. Hopefully that doesn't come through in the recording. So, moving on to science fiction. Nine Fox Gambit, Raven Stratagem, and Revenant Gun. This is the Machineries of Empire trilogy by Yoon-Ah Lee. Yoon-Ah Lee is a trans man and Korean American, I believe. And I have actually only read the first one in this series. I was trying to reread it last month so that I could remember what was going on to finish it up, and I just ran out of time, basically, to get it done. So hopefully the last week of this month I will be done with reading books for this project and I can sink back into these. They are space opera style science fiction. Our main character is a lesbian, but I didn't include it in the lesbian book video because there is absolutely no romantic element, at least in the first one. And she's not the only queer character. There's just kind of a sort of generally queer vibe about the books, which I love. And so that's why I'm including them here in the queer books rather than any other video. These are books that just sort of toss you in to the story and you have to figure it out as you go. It's very sink or swim style, which again is something that I really like in books, but I know isn't everyone's cup of tea. So if you prefer your sci-fi with a little bit more hand-holding, this probably isn't the series for you. But if you are okay with just have at, it's a great series. Or at least the first one is really good, and I don't think I'll be disappointed by the others. And very last book that I'm going to talk about in this video is The Memory Librarian by Janelle Monáe. So this is a debut novel for Janelle Monáe, but of course she is, or they. I think they used she, they, but I'm not totally sure. Singer, hip hop, I think is the category. So the Memory Librarian and Other Stories of Dirty Computer takes some of the concepts from her albums and puts them in book form. It is co-written, so it has, I believe, 5 chapters. Yeah, 5 chapters. Each chapter is a story complete unto itself. But they all take place in the same universe, and it feels very much like you should read all of them and read them in order. This is not one that you want to, skip around. So it's more like a series of vignettes than a short story collection. So each chapter is written with co-written with a different author. The Memory Librarian is written with Alea Dawn Johnson. Nevermind is with Danny Lore. Timebox is with Eve L. Ewing. Save Changes is with Johanka Delgado. And Timebox Altered is with Cherie Renee Thomas. I really liked this book. It took me a little bit to get into it, but once I did, I was into it. And I think that some of my difficulty with it is that I'm not super familiar with Janelle Monáe's music, or the whole dirty computer concept. I don't dislike her music. It's just not my go-to genre of music in general. But the book, I thought the concept was really good. Once I figured out what was going on, I really liked it. And I'm putting this in the generally queer category because the idea is that there are people and robots who don't fit into the societal norms, and many of those people are queer. So, trans, homo or bisexual, just generally non-binary, generally not accepted by the governmental system, which I didn't ever totally piece together what it was or how it worked, but the stories were still good and I really liked the book. So that is it for my queer book recommendations. If you have read any of these, let me know in the comments. If you have any recommendations for me